How do you see this whole thing playing out?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Brian. First, I'd just like to say how pleased I was to hear President Biden's tough language saying that Nord Stream 2 will be canceled regardless if there were any further incursions into sovereign Ukrainian territory. Of course, Russia's already been there, continues to illegally occupy Crimea and the Donbass region. But hearing that strong message from the president is important, especially since we've not heard similar strong messaging coming out of Germany. Perhaps the German chancellor doesn't want to sound provocative, but I think it's kind of late for that at this point with 130,000 troops mobilized around the Ukrainian border.
Yeah, I put out a sort of a long Twitter thread over the weekend, sort of the very basic sort of synopsis as how I saw this. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the show, but I basically said this comes down to pipelines, energy, and money. Is this ultimately all about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline?
A lot of it is around the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, but I think it's important to distinguish the difference between the money component and the influence component. Oil represents a far bigger point for Russia's revenues than does gas. Gas is relatively minuscule. However, gas has a disproportionate impact in terms of the influence game, in particular in the context of Europe, with supplying more than 35% and upwards of 40% and more to Germany in particular. So although gas has a small impact in terms of the revenue, it's really, it has an outside asymmetric importance to the influence and the power that it wields over certain European states. They have this concept of this dependency is affecting the psychology of states, particular countries like Germany, that limits the optionality for other foreign policy measures. It's always in their mindset. And so it's really upsetting to see that Germany has not taken the lesson for over years to really diversify its energy mix in a substantial way away from Germany.
Yeah, why they have done so is simply bizarre, but it's probably more of a measure of ultimately German politics and coalition building more than anything else, Frank. Here's the disconnect, however. We are thinking we could be perhaps hours or days away from some significant military action by Russia. Ukrainian's president, though, is inviting President Biden to visit Kiev, effectively saying, we're fine, come on over and visit. It could go a lot to destabilizing it. And looking at, tweets and everything else from people that are in Ukraine, they don't seem that concerned. What, in your mind, Frank, is the real risk and threat level right now?
Well, I think whenever you have troops like amassing on the borders, it's significant. I think that the Ukrainians would certainly like to see President Biden visit. That makes a lot of sense. It would create a pretty important message for Russia not to continue this provocative action. But things are in a strange place right now. And I think that the president, the administration is trying to be prudent and trying to send the message to the Russians not to move forward with the current plans. We all have to hope that that's the case. And having a strong U.S.-EU transatlantic relationship to prevent this expansion. The point here, Brian, is that this behavior is not going to stop at Ukraine's doorstep. It's going to expand. You've heard this from other countries in the Baltic region, in particular Poland. So this is not going to be contained to just Ukraine.
Do you think that Vladimir Putin, as I suggested over the weekend, is trying to make Ukraine look less stable so that he can promote the, quote, more stable Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which does not go through Ukraine or really any other country? In a sense, Putin appears to be trying to solve a problem that he has created himself.
Yeah, it's really well put, Brian. I think you're spot on. The Kremlin's been moving forward with a disinformation campaign over many years. Their hybrid warfare capabilities in the cyber realm has been well documented. Russia doesn't like to have competition. They don't like to have other options being developed, in particular in the energy game, because it provides them such an outsized level of influence. So absolutely, Nord Stream 2 is intended to completely divert and cut off Ukrainian gas transit. I mean, in the sense of some of these pipelines through Ukraine, it has a greater importance than just the transit revenues, It's really a bridge that Ukraine has ceded is complete to the West to keep it linked in and have the European Union, kind of the reform efforts that Europe is pushing forward. It travels all the way down that pipeline. Putin wants to stop that in its tracks. He wants to put prey on the endemic historic corruption and push back against some of these reform efforts that are really manifesting themselves in Ukraine and have been for several years now.